Yeah, I'll admit, on the surface, you look at Eric Bieniemy not having an NFL head coaching job and having to go to the Washington Commanders to become an assistant head coach and offensive coordinator. Something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't look like right. Something is really, really off here. I totally agree. You're talking about a guy that's been an offensive coordinator now for 5 years at the NFL level, has been to 3 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl championships, 5 conference championship game appearances in that 5-year stretch as offensive coordinator. He's only 53 years old, former NFL player. He's interviewed with over half the teams in the league over the past 3+ seasons. Yeah, Eric Bieniemy not having an NFL head coaching job smells. It smells like something, which is leading a lot of people to gravitate to the thing that is easiest to quantify, the thing that is easiest to understand, the thing that is the easiest to lay at the feet of NFL teams in the league as a whole because of its past and current history, and that is the fact that Eric Bieniemy is not getting an NFL head coaching job because he's black. And I totally understand it, because the NFL's lack of diversity and representation at the head coaching level is a major problem. It stems from systemic problems stretching back decades. It's not an easy fix. It is going to take time. It's going to take probably 2 to 3 decades to really right the ship there. It's going to take time. I mean, if you look at the list of black or non-white minority NFL head coaches, you've got Mike Tomlin, Ron Rivera, Robert Saleh, Todd Bowles, Mike McDaniel, DeMeco Ryans just got hired down in Houston. And you'll notice outside of McDaniel, all these other guys are defensive guys, which further ties into the systemic problems for minority candidates getting coaching opportunities on the offensive side of the ball. They tend to get lumped in and thrown in on the defensive side of the ball. And with as much as the game has shifted towards an offense-first philosophy and wanting those offensive-minded guys, it's just a problem that continues to exacerbate itself in a new way. And it's going to take time to fix that, because as much as it's easy to say it's the NFL's fault alone, it's the NFL's problem alone, it absolutely is not. And that is disingenuous to say that it is. This goes down to the college level, the high school level, the pee-wee level. That's where those coaches come from. So this shit's going to take a long time to fix. And so I get it. Like you're saying, this guy's been an offensive coordinator for 5 years. He can't get an NFL head coaching job? Look at some of these fucking bums that did. What the hell's this dude got to do? Yeah, the NFL's freaking racist. Honestly, though, is this really just a race thing this time? Now, maybe there is something to say that Eric Bieniemy is being held to a higher standard than maybe less qualified white candidates. That could absolutely be true. We're not privy to the discussions in these organizations. We're not privy to the specifics of what goes on. We're not there for when the decisions are made. There absolutely could be something to that, and I wouldn't doubt that there is. So I got to acknowledge that. But you've also had in the last 2 off-season coaching carousel cycles, 5 black head coaches hired. We are counting Mike McDaniel because his dad is black, and that's how America works. Right or wrong, it is, you have 1 drop, you are not just white. You're at least biracial. That's it. You've got Robert Saleh, Todd Bowles, DeMeco Ryans, and if you remember the year before, it was Lovie Smith, and if you remember the year before, it was David Culley. So the Texans, in 3 consecutive cycles, have hired 3 different minority head coaches. And Eric Bieniemy is not any of them. So if we were looking at this and saying Eric Bieniemy was the most obvious candidate and no minority coaches were being hired, or maybe just 1, then yeah, where there's smoke, it's a frickin' fire, it's a goddamn inferno at that point. But you are seeing other guys getting hired, and Bieniemy is not. So as easy as it is to point to the thing that visually is the most obvious to you, the easiest to quantify, I pose this to you. Maybe the owners, the front offices, the general managers aren't the only problem. Maybe Eric Bieniemy is the big part of the problem for Eric Bieniemy. And here's why I say that. If it was just a thing of him being black, and you said none of these white general managers were going to hire him, fine. Well, then why are black general managers passing on him too? The past few years, Chris Greer hired Brian Flores. He hired Mike McDaniel. Back-to-back minority coaching hires. Eric Bieniemy not in the mix there ultimately. Brad Holmes in Detroit. Could have hired Eric Bieniemy, hired Dan Campbell instead. George Patton in freaking Denver hired Nathaniel Hackett. He could have hired Bieniemy, he didn't. Second go around, could have hired Bieniemy, and instead he hired Sean Payton. Which, transparently, if I'm looking at Sean Payton and Eric Bieniemy, I'm going to go with the head coach that actually won a Super Bowl in their previous stop. Sorry, not sorry. Most of you would too. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah in Minnesota. He also could have hired Eric Bieniemy. He hired Kevin O'Connell. You'll see some folks talking about, hey, this doesn't feel right, and it's not right, that guys like Kevin O'Connell and Nathaniel Hackett are getting hired as head coaches and they weren't even play callers in the previous spot. And that's absolutely a valid point. So the whole question of, well, how much say does Eric Bieniemy really have on the play calling? How much is he involved with the offensive game plan and so forth? It's a fair point. It is a hypocritical double standard that people could be putting out there, but it also could have absolutely nothing to do with why he's not getting hired. Now, I'm going to give you a really specific example here that illustrates the point. Let's look at the Giants. Last offseason, last coaching carousel, they hired Joe Schoen away from the Buffalo Bills to be their general manager. Who does he hire as his head coach ultimately? Brian Daboll. So you look at Daboll and you say, okay, this is a guy that he worked with in Buffalo. He understood, he knew, he was familiar with. He saw what he did with Josh Allen in that offense. He was comfortable with them and said, I'm putting my trust in Brian Daboll. That's the guy that I want as my head coach. Feels logical, right? Like, you're going to elevate one of your boys, if you will. But more importantly, you're going to elevate somebody that you already have an established working relationship with. You are familiar with their philosophy. You're avoiding maybe some of those surprises when you hire somebody new into the role. You like to have that. Meanwhile, in that same coaching carousel last year, the Chicago Bears, an organization where George McCaskey, Goofy George himself, yuck, is a very big proponent now, somehow this happened, of diversity and inclusion. And that's legit. And you see that when he hired a mid-30s Ryan Poles away from the Kansas City Chiefs to be the team's general manager. And then about a year later hires Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten, to be the Bears team president. So, Ryan Poles comes in from Kansas City, being a part of that organization for years, having intimate working knowledge of Eric Bieniemy and who he is, what he's about, what he does. And not only does Eric Bieniemy not get the damn job in Chicago, he wasn't even one of the 3 finalists. That was Jim Caldwell, Dan Quinn, and who ultimately got the job was Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator in Indianapolis, who the last game of that 2021 season, you remember what happened to the Colts? They got their shit pushed in by the freaking Jaguars, who had nothing to play for, and the Colts had a playoff spot in the line. And Ryan Poles took a look and said, that's the guy I want. Inject me with that Eberfuel! I don't want the guy that I just spent the past several years being around and working with in Kansas City that was the offensive coordinator for a team that made 4 straight AFC championship games at the time, 2 Super Bowl appearances, and won a championship. He not only didn't hire him, he wasn't even a finalist. If that doesn't smell like something, I don't know what does. So you've got several black general managers passing as well on Eric Bieniemy. So it's not just the white general managers. And this is not me posing an opinion. This is a fact. We're going based off of who was freaking hired for these jobs and who's making those hiring decisions. And Ryan Poles totally and completely passed on Eric Bieniemy, where you would think if there was any shot for Eric Bieniemy, based off of the past couple of coaching cycles, was going to get an opportunity. Hey, here's somebody from KC, somebody from the Chiefs. They're going to want to hire me. And he didn't even think about it. What does that tell you? That should tell you that there's more to the story here. It should tell you that either there's a word out there that he doesn't interact well with players, he doesn't interact well with other coaches, there are concerns about his organization. I've seen some people talk about the off-the-field stuff, and that shit's going back decades. I really can't see that being a consideration. Who knows, maybe, but I doubt it. Because we're also talking about the NFL, so at some point in time, they only give but so much of an F about that stuff, if you get what I'm saying. No, it's something more. It's either they're getting intel, these teams are, that you want to stay away from Bieniemy, he can't be trusted to run an entire locker room, or he's going in there and he's bombing these interviews. Maybe not bombing them, that could be a strong choice of words. He's just not doing as well as he could. He's doing a lot of interviews, but he's not doing any of them really, really well. He's not hitting any home runs. He's not providing a lot of details. He's not providing a lot of specifics. He's not painting the right picture, the right vision. And whether you think that's important or not, or whether it should be important or not, it's fair to question. But at the end of the day, when you're doing job interviews, that kind of shit matters. It's important. You're ultimately selling yourself. And perhaps Eric Bieniemy is going into these interviews and he's not doing the best job possible of selling himself. So while it is easy to focus on the most obvious thing based off of the NFL's history and the NFL's problems and say, yeah, this doesn't smell right and that's why, don't be like Nick Wright and saying, this is the most fucking racist thing the NFL has done in the last 15 years. Really, asshole? You think so? You got like Louis Riddick talking about how outrageous it is. Anybody that's positing this, have they actually stopped and thought about it for a moment? And said, you know what? This does feel odd. This feels weird. But maybe there's a reason for it that isn't so obvious that I don't know. Because everybody is passing on this guy. And maybe at this point, it's one of those things, he's got a stigma or a stench that's unfair on Eric Bieniemy, and he needs to go to Washington, show what he can do, and get away from Andy Reid, and maybe in a year he'll be a head coach and it won't matter. Or he could go there and he bombs, and it'll validate other teams for not having hired him. Who the freak knows? All I'm saying is that it is not such a black and white issue here, if you will. And I really hone in on that Chicago Bears example with Ryan Poles. Not only did he not hire him, Bieniemy wasn't even a finalist. If that doesn't make you stop, pause, and think, hey man, there might be more to the story, then I don't know what else to tell you. Hopefully Bieniemy gets a head coaching job at some point, but maybe right now there's a reason he's not, and it's not the reason that everybody is just kind of lazily grabbing onto.